That's it, right? We are live, are we not, fellas?
Indeed,
Happening.
we are.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm here with Nathan Smith, Dave the Rake. Finally, we tracked him down, got him into a trunk of a car, and into the Iron Age compound. We're here with Jeff McNukes. I'm Cinder Mountain Villager, obviously, and we've got Renegade in the booth. What's up, fellas?
Hey, thanks for
Uh,
having me on. Glad to be here.
I'm not sure if this is a good time to bring it up, but there's a little bit of a naming controversy regarding the show. And I thought we could throw it out to the audience whether we should name the show IronStream and then have the episode name right afterwards, or the episode number right after. Or we should name the show IronStream 1, kind of like Air Force 1 or Gulfstream 1, and then the episode number. So, yeah, send us your feedback. Let us know in the comments down below.
Cinder Stream is also an option, so you can put that on there as well. So, Lauren Southern has dropped the bomb with this documentary. I would encourage everyone to go look at Nathan Smith's video. It's pretty interesting. But yeah, Lauren Southern calling everybody out, naming names. What do you guys, Nathan, what is your overall impression of the documentary as it stands now?
Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, I put a decent amount of thought into it now that I've done this initial stream. Um, I've got kind of a mixed interpretation of Lauren Southern and her work overall, but this documentary itself, I think that it really demonstrates a lot of her blind spots, and it's very clear that we're only getting one side of the story, and she is very desperate to portray herself as this innocent.
Did we
Did we
lose
just
him
lose
there?
audio?
Yeah, we lost you at innocent, Nathan.
Person
Some
in this mad world, and it's everyone else's fault. What's going on?
There's a glitch. uh, yeah, you were saying innocent, and then it just cut out there.
Okay. She's very desperate to portray herself as this innocent person, kind of filled in this mad world where everyone else is really corrupt and really crazy except for her. She's the pure one. And while she was involved with all of these supposedly crazy people, she didn't really have any issues with it until they started to come after her. And then she's going to throw them all under the bus while she accuses them of all throwing the people around them under the bus. So it's pretty hypocritical, and I think she needs to be kind of thoroughly. She needs to confront the people who she's making these accusations against. Like, they need to have a conversation.
You know, it's funny in that documentary is the first time I've ever heard her talk about her Christianity. So you can kind of see that there's a little bit of a performance or presentation, like a very, very deliberate way of presenting herself. That she is this good Christian girl who was just doing everything for the cause and didn't want to, you know, didn't want to do anything bad. But finally, she has had enough. Now that not that she's getting criticism from everybody else. Now she's had enough and she has to speak out.
Well, what reasons do we have to doubt her?
The So one of the big red flags for me was that when she's telling stories, it's like, after a while you've had enough life experiences to know that things don't always play out the way that a single person portrays or describes them as. There tends to be a second side of the story that we're just not hearing. But the thing that caused me to doubt this the most is that when she
You're
would
saying in
tell,
chat right now that our volume is low. Chat, can you specify whose volume is low?
it's Cinder specifically, I think.
Mic check. 1, 2, 3. 3, 2, 1. Mic check.
On my side, that seems
Sounds
good in
good to me.
relation to the
Yeah.
other people. Yeah, I think that's good. But what I noticed was that there's the way that reality plays out, and then there is the way that like a movie plays out. And the way information is presented on a movie isn't usually like it happens a certain way on a movie because that's a very visual medium. And I found that when she was telling stories, it was like she was describing a storyboard. And to me, it didn't seem accurate to actual events. So my first thought when I would hear a lot of her stories was like, she is definitely paraphrasing. This is definitely not the way things happened. This is a summary. And that sort of summary, I suspect, is slanted. And I've since heard back from one of the people that she sort of went after, and he has a completely different side of one of the accounts that she talks about.
I was really surprised at how many like screenshots she had from throughout this entire experience, which is not a red flag for me, but it's surprising.
I have a question to throw out to you guys. Did either of you guys grow up in the suburbs your whole life?
Not my whole life, but I spent some formative years in a suburb.
Nathan?
Uh, yeah, I would say it's accurate to say it was a suburb. We're kind of on the
Okay.
fringe, but yeah.
Okay. I was gonna throw out this theory because I think I think I'm pretty I consider myself a pretty gullible person. So when I first saw the Lauren Southern documentary, I was like, oh, this is like truth bombs left, right, and center. And I just later on I kind of find I looked through a lot of the videos that were critical about it, including yours, and it was kind of like, oh, maybe it's kind of this like gullibility that I have as a suburban kid, because I see a lot of videos from other guys who kind of have like this New York City street smarts, or this kind of rural, you know, salt of the earth type of smarts, and I think that my theory was at least was that suburban kids lack that, so we're just more gullible. I have the coof, by the way. That's why I'm struggling to speak right now.
I think Lauren wants to present herself as being naive or gullible, but I think what she's doing is actually very manipulative. I think she knew better and she's pretending that she doesn't.
All right. Some people in the chat are saying that they haven't seen the Lauren Southern thing. Cinder, do you want to give us a quick rundown of what it was all about?
Yeah, so basically, if you recall, at some point, everybody dogpiled on Lauren Southern when she said that she was tapping out of politics. And they said, oh, what convenient timing. You've been throwing people under the bus. You've been making backroom deals with all these leftist organizations. And that, there were a lot of accusations thrown at her that she didn't answer because she was stepping out of politics. And for some reason, she didn't answer any of those accusations, and now she is. And go watch the documentary. It's interesting. They call it the dissident right. My definition of the dissident right is much different. It includes people like not me, not you, and everybody else who's in the chat. That's why I shout them out. On our side, it's not. I don't consider like Lauren Southern or Ezra Levant or what's his name, Paul Joseph Watson, dissident right. Like I consider them more alt right, edgy right, but
There was
they're
certainly a
not.
time in history when they represented the dissident right.
Sure, absolutely. But she's calling all those people out, Milo, and talking about how disorganized and dishonest and unethical all that stuff is, which is surprising. Do you guys believe that some of those accusations, as far as ethically and organizationally, are true?
Regarding which person depends.
All of them specifically. Like I think it was bad form to talk about dating with Paul Joseph Watson. I think that one could probably have stayed in the shadows.
I think she
Yeah.
had to address him specifically. I think she had to.
And she had to go for the heart, right? So that's why she had to drop all that stuff about, oh, he wanted to copulate with me, and then he showed those late night drunk texts that he's sending her.
Well,
Regarding her
go
story
ahead, Jeff.
about, yeah, sorry. Regarding her story about Ezra Levant and why she got fired from Rebel Media, that one seems a little bit of a one-sided, incomplete story. Because why would they fire their top talent, the one who was getting them all their views, for simply sending an email, internal email, to question this one specific issue that she had? Doesn't really add up.
I mean, I get it. I can see it, and it looks like, I mean, if you look at Trump's administration, like you screw up once and you're out, right? And Ezra Levant seems like a megalomaniac. We all know that he was a grifter from the beginning, right? The whole fundraising thing, she raises issue, and that, from a managerial point of view, you make yourself a loose end or a liability. And so you got to let that person go. And I'm sure there was an NDA of some sort signed with that for her to get her severance. I don't know, but I'm speculating here.
Also, back then, there wasn't so many differences in terminology between alt-right and alt-light. And I don't even know if we were using the term dissident right back then. It was kind of like there was mainstream conservatism. There was the main right-wing platforms, those political party, or that single political party. And then there was the people who were right-wing but didn't feel like the mainstream platforms represented them. And they were sort of like, it was everyone else. You throw Pepe into that, all these. And out of that, we would say now that there's a lot of different factions within that category. But back then, we weren't as particular about these things. And I think this was all before Charlottesville. And a lot of that kind of like Jay question stuff was, I suspect that the Rebel Media audience was having to navigate that. And I interpret the Israel trip as a way of trying to kind of rein people in that were entertaining certain ideas that Ezra Levant wasn't crazy about. And it was after that trip that, like, basically Gavin was gone, Faith Goldie was gone, and Lauren Southern was gone. So I think that this is probably the exoteric explanation that Lauren is giving us, that it had to do with the money related to this specific trip. But I have a sneaking suspicion that if she got too close to Ezra related to like Israel, she was probably worried she was going to lose a lot of her fan base too.
Oh, interesting.
Because
I
we all
think-
knew that Ezra was a grifter, right?
I think there
Yeah.
could have been a mutual thing there too, where Ezra also wanted to distance himself from the edgier side of the alt-light. So could have worked in both of their benefit.
Well, and there's also a limited audience for this quote unquote dissident right, and a lot of people are vying for it. And if somebody is outshining you, which I think maybe Lauren was on the pathway to doing, there is a defensive reaction to cut that person off from your funding. Because didn't she say that she was getting a lot of attention while at Rebel Media?
She was getting all the attention.
Yeah, and that, from a purely irrational, purely egotistic thing, it makes sense then that you're just looking for a reason to can her, to exercise power and importance over her. So, that's, again, just speculation, which is what we're doing here until Lauren finally answers my calls. I've been getting really drunk and sending her text messages, but nothing yet.
Not cocaine field, at least, right?
Nah, man, nah.
What do you guys think of this kind of? It's certainly Milo Yiannopoulos' theory, at least, that Milo Yiannopoulos, there was no movement without Milo Yiannopoulos for a long time. In the beginning, it was all Milo Yiannopoulos.
I kind of disagree with that, but I can see why there'd be a strong argument for it.
Yeah, I don't really remember because at the time I was into do you guys remember PJTV or Pajamas Media or whatever? It was a lot of Bill Whittle, Andrew Clavin, Alfonso Rachel. Those were the guys that I was into when Milo Yiannopoulos came around. And of course, he brought a whole new thing to it, but I was never comfortable with like the decadent gay guy aesthetic, and that being like, hey, this is the right now. We're gay, we do drugs, we love transgender, or even that subject wasn't that big of a deal. But are we surprised that came to a head?
Well, yeah, this is actually one of the things that I really wanted to talk about today, which is why I named the stream On the Online Right Under Lies. But that's also a clickbait title. I don't know. But it's that for a long time, especially in 2015, the right wing had this idea that we're just going to be mischievous for the sake of mischief. And I think over the years, we've kind of gotten rid of a little bit of that, but I think it's still very prevalent among the people in this subcircle.
Well, it's
Yeah, like
definitely a
there's,
tool that's used. Go ahead, Nathan.
I was just going to say, there's a reason that people like Alex Stein are as popular as they are now. Like that mischief is still there. But maybe it was more part of the larger culture back then. Maybe you do have a good point.
But I feel like his stuff, it is his stuff contextually, his performance art is more conceptual or less conceptual and more specific than Groyper memes or the predecessors to that whole just kind of antagonistic extremism. It's specific to a topic or a issue. Is that resonating, or is that just a dumb thing to say?
No, that's true. But it's like, so is a meme, right? Like a meme tends to relate to whatever the topic of the meme is. But I agree. What he is tapping into is almost something a little bit, I don't know if it's larger, but it is a bit different. That spirit of mischievousness is still there, but it is something different.
Yeah, not me, not you raises a good point in chat, saying we were all younger back then. Many of us on the DR now are in our 20s and 30s, just getting into politics via something that seemed authentic through its audacity. So now our tastes have changed, right? Like
Yeah.
we're not into cheap beer anymore. We want some fine Scotch, single malt.
Yeah. I mean, for me, Gamergate was my first foray into politics.
Yeah, and that was 2015, right? Right
Yeah.
around the time Milo would come about. And then
Yeah.
2016 and the Great Meme War.
And I think we all kind of fought the culture war, or played our part. There's sort of like, where you enter the battlefield and it's a large scale conflict. But then when you mature a little bit, you're kind of more involved in the, I guess, like the back deal assassinations, if we're going to use an allegory here. But you just kind of like, you're still in the fight, but you reconfigure how it is that you're fighting. And I know for myself, it's like, I don't think I could go back to fighting the way that we used to. Part of it is because I'm so tired and I don't see the fruit fighting that way. There's other
Yeah.
ways of fighting.
It's interesting that you bring that up. I had this thought earlier too. That's that we're lucky we're in the era of internet politics, because if we were in the early 1900s, for example, we would actually be assassinating each other instead of doxing each other and blackmailing each other.
You make a really good point there.
But yeah, that is another thing that I want to get to today as well, which is the infighting. So yeah, a lot of the most of what I got out of Lauren Southern's documentary wasn't so much about the details of the various people and what they did, but more so it gave me a couple of questions that I think are worth considering about the broader dissident right movement.
Well, I mean, what I got out of the documentary is that at some level, everybody is a grifter in that sphere. Not our sphere, but in that sphere, what she's talking about, everybody sounded like a grifter, except for maybe Stefan Molyneux, which, I mean, he doesn't need to be a grifter because he's already a cult leader, right, guys?
You say that jokingly, but I kind of
You can,
somewhat agree.
you subscribe to that. There are aspects of him that I really miss. And now on, like we had talked about in some of our previous videos, he's on BitChute doing love line style calls, sex calls, weird shit. And I just can't go back.
I don't know. I kind of have a hard time calling all the, like, despite all the infighting and all the people that she's describing, and if they had done shady things and there's a degree of corruption, everything, I still kind of have a hard time calling them all grifters. Like even Lauren, even as much as I disagree with her, and like she saw opportunities and she made money for the work that she was doing just like anyone else who works. And I guess like the alternative would be that we would expect her to fund everything that she did herself. My criticism with her would have more to do with how she blurred professional and personal relationships and sort of like utilized her sexuality, but tried to pretend to be coy. And, you know, she says at one point in her documentary that the political and the personal overlap, and the people who are critical of her tend to be the kind of people who just wanted to date her or who were upset that they didn't get to sleep with her. So she sort of rolls out this genetic fallacy, and a lot of it is projection because she was the one to blend the personal and professional. She talks about how she went out on a date or dates or whatever with Paul Joseph Watson. A lot of the controversy had to do with Milo's writer, who also wrote for her, who she also dated. And so she has this track record of blending these things, and then she's kind of going to complain about that. So that's more where my criticism comes from. But the whole grifter thing is it's really tricky because then we have to kind of like split hairs on how we're going to define that. And then, you know, at what point is a person receiving super chats a grifter? You know, I guess it comes down to whether you could say that the underlining motivation of their work is fueled by money or the cause, right? At the point that it's no longer about the cause and it's about the money, then they become a grifter. And then you kind of have the classic, like, you know, it's the same thing with all music bands. You know, they sold out, they left the love of the music or whatever. Like eventually those questions come up, and it's hard to know when there's really definitive lines as to when that occurs because we all kind of draw those lines differently. So that's kind of a hard thing.
Yeah, this is actually a pretty complicated issue because at first everybody who starts in this quote unquote business, they start out as an amateur. They do this as a hobby. And then once they start making enough money, they have to make that decision to go professional, quit their job, their real job. And once that happens, then it's all this pressure to continue to keep up that level of income. And so it's not an easy thing to navigate, you know.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of my notes was this term grifter is getting thrown around a lot. And it gets to the point where the right wing accusation of grifter is just like, well, you're a racist. I don't like what you're doing, therefore racist.
Yeah. The right wing equivalent of racist is grifter. Yeah.
Yeah, you're a Fed,
Yeah.
you're a grifter, you're a
Fed, yeah,
racist. It's all the
exactly.
same.
Yeah. Actually, Renegade, could you throw up 01 JPEG?
Shout out to Rennie in the booth. That's the man right there.
So yeah, this is one of the questions that I have for the dissonant right, which is that there seems to be this problem that we always run into, which is it's a form of purity spiraling. It's also a form of paranoia, which we don't know who we can trust, I guess. And I think one of the problems is actually that we don't have a common definition of what is right wing. So who is more right wing? Is a fascist more right wing than a monarchist? Who's more right wing? Is an anarcho-capitalist more right wing than a national socialist? You know, we have all these questions. We can't even clearly define what is right wing. And then when we have disagreements, this paranoia seeps in. Oh, this guy isn't really right wing. He's a grifter. He's a Fed, and so on.
Well, and then you get burned by that guy. Say you're in a working relationship and the human aspect comes out. One of the things I was going to mention is, you know, working in film and television and stuff like that, these sort of internal power struggles and the throwing under the bus and Machiavellian political maneuvering behind closed doors is a human thing. It's not just the online right that has emotional and psychological problems. Humans, especially in entertainment or media, are crazy. Ask me how I know. I'm one of them.
Yeah. Well, however, places like Hollywood and places like the internet are places that kind of fester or give really good opportunities to people with mental problems.
And they're all, or they're both decidedly satanic.
But yeah, I do wonder how we're ever gonna solve such a problem.
I
Because there's
mean,
always
it's,
this talking point. Oh, we should just put our differences aside and fight the left. But I don't see that happening.
well, certainly not online. You know, to some extent, it's all an echo chamber, and we end up arguing all the time because of small differences. And we're in, you know, it's behind closed doors. So we can argue behind closed doors, but we never seem to get out from this closed room, right, of the internet. We don't get out that much.
Yeah, and that was actually, I don't know if you're setting me up like to transition from my bullet points, but thanks.
That's what I'm
Uh,
here for.
that was actually the second question that I had, which is, well, online relationships are inherently transient. There's nothing that truly binds us to our online relationships. If we don't like our Discord community, we can just move on to the next one. There's more buses than there are people we can throw under those buses, right? There's more. There's always another echo chamber that you can jump onto. And I think that this is the other problem with the online, right, and online politics in general. It's that there's nothing that binds us. It's actually completely opposite if you think about it to um, hopefully most of our experiences with church, where with church there's accountability. You show up and we're actually called to forgive one another's trespasses, right? There's like a forgiveness mechanism built into that. Whereas with online, it kind of encourages the opposite, actually, that we should infight and we should throw each other under the bus to gain clout. And you know, so this is the second problem that I see with the online, right? Thoughts?
Well, and I think that's slowly changing. The Iron Age archive was sent, a delegation was sent to the Tennessee Shieldings event and met a bunch of guys. I'm going to do a bunch of stuff. I don't know if he is still here, but not me, not you. I met him there. And there is a component, an emphasis growing on real life stuff and going on trips, going out, getting together. Where that's going to go, in my opinion, I put the emphasis on businesses and or projects to move towards that stuff and creating things, be it product, service, artistic works, as we've talked about, Jeff. That's what our new focus should be. We can still do the online stuff, but like you said with church, starting to go into church, and now I go to two churches. I go to one service in town, and then the guy I'm working for on a farm goes to another small church, and I drive out there and do second church. And then that night is Bible study in town. And that stuff is so much more, even though I may not agree with a lot of their theology, it's so much more authentic than the meme channel in Iron Age Archive Discord, which you should all join.
Yeah, I think drawing those two distinctions between the church and this other thing, I guess we would call it culture war, they're two very different things. And if we were expecting to get any sort of like healthy progress or salvation or anything through the culture war, I mean, we're we're barking up the wrong tree there.
Yeah. But I think there was this expectation of friendship or brotherhood, alliance, that kind of thing, community. That's not materializing.
Yeah, I think there was kind of a desperate hope that maybe we would be able to change things. And it's like maybe on the sort of most, um, you have your church group that you're the closest to, say, and then some of your activity online is in some way an extension of almost evangelism, or it's a way to try and engage with the non-believing world and sort of win them over to your side of things. And if you're going to go, if you're going to do that through jokes, or there's all sorts of, whatever different ways, but that's not to be confused with the actual like life-giving structure of the church. And um, maybe I'm speaking for myself here, but in time, I just found that the culture war side of it was less and less productive. And the best that I could do was kind of just sort of like create my own island that if there's other people who want to step into to interact with some of my ideas, they can. But it's not to say that I've given up on trying to debate with leftists or argue with them or anything like that, but the chasm's just so wide. It's so wide that it's I think it's easy for us to infight because at least then there's enough in common that we can actually argue over. Whereas with the leftist, it's like I'm not even at all convinced that I'm having a good faith conversation at all. So I may as well criticize Lauren Southern because otherwise I'm, criticizing Vosh where just about everything I disagree with. And what's the point?
The
Yeah, that's
island
a
analogy is interesting too, because I didn't realize that was what I was doing, but the more that I think about it, it's yeah, I've never really wanted to engage in that like blood sports type of arena. Actually, a couple years ago, I didn't get a formal invitation to Killstream, but someone who was talking to Ralph was also talking to me, trying to see if he could get me commit to going on the Killstream, and I didn't really want any part of it. Not because I think I'm above that or anything like that. It's more that I don't feel like I'm cut out for that kind of thing. I've never wanted to be a part of that kind of thing.
I
So
could not
I've
imagine
always
you on Killstream, dude. And it's
yeah,
like you said, it's just not in your wheelhouse.
it's not my DNA, and I'm really happy with continuing to be on an island.
I might start to venture into debates a little bit. I'm entertaining that thought.
That would be fun. I would support you doing that. That would be a cool thing.
But
What
yeah,
was asset number 2, the number 2 JPEG?
Yeah,
Tim?
pull that shit up, Renegade. It's it was just a meme. It's about online friends.
you have to go back
It
to
should have came
your
up earlier.
original question about the how easy it is to discard these social communities within the right online and how that is contrary to the sort of permanence of the church. Um, do you think it's a bad thing, the sort of transient nature of this online work? Like I know I've had to adjust a lot socially to it. Like I can't treat it like regular relationships is what it is. And when I first started to get into online work, I more or less thought of it the same way as I thought of real life relationships. But now that I kind of see what its purpose is, um, I mean, like you remember that time where I completely nuked my Discord, and at that time there was, I don't know, more than 100 people in it or whatever, just suddenly gone.
Yeah,
And I'm so used to having people on the internet just kind of be there and then one day disappear. And I definitely think there's almost like advantages to it. It's like the same way that, Antifa doesn't have an identity. There's strategic reasons for why it is that they're doing that. It's decentralized. That's what it is it's that
that
it
is
allows us to
interesting.
be decentralized. And it almost like doesn't matter whether or not we have a degree of permanence because it's the ideas that just sort of all one way or another congregate together and pop up and reemerge, and who cares what the username is, Yeah.
Yeah, I can
What do you think?
certainly see that there is an advantage to that. But I think also though that the transience of relationships in the modern age is a pattern that's kind of it doesn't just apply to relationships. It's kind of expanding into every area of our life where everything has become transient. And then we wonder, I saw this on some other podcast, but look at our view of gender, for example, now, where things that are supposed to be permanent are suddenly becoming transient, and relationships themselves actually are supposed to be something that's grounded, in a more fixed reality.
I just want to go back really quick to what Nathan said about Antifa being decentralized and how that helps them get together and smash up a Starbucks. What is the right wing equivalent of a decentralized organization, and what activities do they do? Like, could we be decentralized and then go build a coffee shop and then disperse, and then we all get our little piece of it, residuals?
Well, the question in both cases, whether we're building a coffee shop or smashing a coffee shop, is who will send us the bricks?
Oh, thank you. That's great, man. Good question. Who's unloading the brick pallets at 3 a.m. the previous night?
Yeah, because as decentralized as Antifa is supposed to appear, in reality, it's not. That's sort of they're meant to have this perception of being this organic movement when really it's like, no, this is a very carefully funded and crafted organization. And yeah, sometimes they scoop up randos, but it's like, it's organized. But I think the sort of right wing equivalent to that in a way would be it's just like the internet anons. And maybe they're not building a coffee shop per se, but they're building the they're building the psychological framework that gives memes any value.
Oh, that's interesting. So it is building, but it's a different kind of building.
Yeah, and who's to say that maybe it manifests one way or another, but it's probably a few degrees further back. Maybe if we had more influence over the culture or the institutions or the mechanism of power, it would be easy for those things to kind of like appear as coffee shops or whatever it is. But for now, they're sort of just appearing as online jokes and movements, occasionally long form videos. Maybe it means certain business collaborations that cause people to, make their own ammo company or whatever it is that people do. It's just probably so many degrees further back that by the time it actually reaches sort of tangible manifestation, it doesn't it doesn't advertise itself as being like, hey, look, it's a dissident right business. But in reality, it is the product of these friendships that came through those sort of online connections. That's sort of my suspicions anyway.
So that would fall into the category of what you view as positive with these transient online relationships.
Well, I don't think that there's anything wrong with a degree of transience. If there are some relationships that are not supposed to be transient, like if you treat if you treat marriage like a sort of transient thing, that's really bad. You shouldn't treat friendships like that. You shouldn't treat church congregations like that. But there is a room for transient relationships as well. Like there's plenty of times in the Bible where Jesus Christ has like a single interaction with a person, or maybe he even hides his identity during an interaction, or like the Bible describes a lot of what you could say are transient interactions. And that's, in a lot of other mythology, that would be like the stranger, your ability to interact with the stranger. And there's a place for the stranger. There's value there. And it's useful to present yourself as a stranger at times. So I don't think transience is bad as long as you're not replacing things that should be permanent with the transient. But you should utilize the transient nature of things too.
Yeah, it's a good point. And yeah, Kobe at home in the chat is saying that that he's met some of his a lot. I can't say.
That's 502.7. That's saying my best friends I now met online. We eventually met IRL. But that's just a handful of people, so it's different, I suppose.
Yeah, and that's another good thing that can come out of this kind of stuff is that eventually some of these people do become your real friends.
Well, one of the guys I met in the Asian capitalist community now lives in the small town that I live in with his family.
He moved across the country to live in the same town as you do. It's pretty cool.
It's super fun. It's great. And that, that's the ideal sort of everywhere, wherever you can. We don't all have to go to the same place, but these small little outposts are probably a good thing.
I met Nathan in a local WhatsApp group for Matt Christensen fan club, right? There's another blast from that. Well, Matt Christensen still does a show, but something that I don't watch anymore, at least. But yeah, we met in a online WhatsApp group, and he asked to sleep on my couch. Uh, was that one of the some of the first few messages that you sent me, or?
Yeah, I completely forget what the context of that was. I
Yeah, yeah,
completely forgot what
yeah,
was going on there, but yeah.
yeah. And I told him no, like a very reasonable person would. But a few weeks later, we did meet up in real life.
Mhm.
So there you go. It's like the transient relationships of the online community are more like a fertile ground for real relationships. But to treat every relationship like it could be something is probably you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Much like signing on to Ezra Levant's Rebel Media as a 19-year-old girl. That was the
Yeah.
biggest funny part for me is like, oh, I went to this thing and Ezra just sat by me and he was talking to me the whole time. It was really weird. And I'm like, bitch, you're a 19-year-old blonde girl. Like, of course he's sitting next to you. Like, are you nuts?
And that's the portion where she's trying to say that she didn't get famous just because she was some cute blonde girl. And it's like,
Yeah, I mean, Ezra Levant's not going to come sit down next to me if I go to his event and
exactly,
like chat
exactly.
me up.
Yeah. Yeah, can I tell you a brief story about Lauren Southern related stuff?
Oh, please. Yeah, we've been talking about non-Lauren and it's the Lauren stream. So please.
Okay, so this was around the time that there was a documentary that came out. I believe it was called The Red Pill. About it was like it was when the culture war was being fought on the lines of anti-feminism,
Yeah,
probably around Gamergate. Yeah.
that's the woman talking about like men's rights activists and how she went in and looked at
Yes.
it from a new perspective.
Yes, Cassie something or other, right? And so this was around that time, and this was also around the time that I discovered that there were people whose content that I was watching that I could actually like meet them. You know, like I met Jordan Peterson, I met like Wim Hof, I met all these random people. I met Matt Christensen. You know, I met Jeff, and there was a debate going on at UBC between Lauren Southern and this other libertarian, this like 60-year-old professor guy, and also Janice Fiamenko, I think her name is. And she was a part of that Red Pill documentary, and she was a university professor who was also getting canceled like Antifa, by Antifa. She was kind of similar to Jordan Peterson's story, except for she never reached the same level of prominence. So anyway, I go to this free speech event where there's going to be this debate with these three people, and I remember I sit next to the guy next to me or whatever. I'm like, oh, have you heard of everyone who's speaking and stuff? And what he says is he's just like, yeah, I'm here to see Lauren Southern. She's really hot. And in my brain, it was kind of like, well, that's unfortunate. And then, okay, so during the debate, Lauren Southern is wearing this like pretty tight dress and like bright red lipstick, and she's debating this like 60-year-old man in like a sweater vest who's a university professor, right? And Janice Fiamenko, she's like kind of crazy frizzy hair and all this stuff. These are these academics, and for Lauren, it was kind of, to me, it was like it didn't match the context what she was doing. To me, she was a bit of a fish out of water. But I was also like, I don't want to condemn women when they don't mean to receive certain attention, and they kind of like, to her, maybe she's just trying to be classy and she's thinking that that is what you wear to a debate. And but whatever, it didn't really match the whole thing. But where it got really creepy was after the debate, and like I went up to Janice Fiamenko and it was like, thank you for your work and everything. And after the debate, there was everyone was going to the bar at UBC, there's like a, area where they have this little liquor thing. And I remember Lauren Southern is standing there at the bar in her dress, and just the vibe was like, it's like the same vibe as like a cougar. Like, like the cougar at the bar who's looking to like poach some young people.
Was she was alone at the bar?
Well, people started to like gather around to talk to her or whatever, right? And I distinctly went out of my way to not say anything to her, to not, because it
Yeah.
was just so weird to me. I was like, this is so weird. This is so creepy. And the what I think, okay, the realizations that I came from that was, one of them was, were it not for her utilizing her female sexuality, maybe half of the tickets would have gotten sold. Had she not done that, maybe there would have been way less tickets, and maybe the event wouldn't have even existed at all, which is like unfortunate. It's the simps are a problem, is basically what I'm saying. And the other side of it is that Lauren may try and say that she isn't flaunting her sexuality in order to try and garner more attention. Maybe she says that, no, that's just her being classy and that fits that sort of context or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But she is going to actively repel the people who don't want to provide her with that kind of attention. Like a lot of these women, they kind of try and want to have it both ways. And they want to
Well,
be a little bit coy, and they put themselves out there, and then they're like, oh, it's so unfortunate that these simps are simping for me. But they ignore the fact that they are actually filtering out a lot of the people who just want to engage with their ideas.
Um, for those of for those people who are in our Discord community, they'll know that we have a strict no girls allowed policy, and the reason is actually, and it's also based on experience that we had when we did have a female in our community who kind of really messed a lot of the guys up, quite frankly. So what I'm saying is that beautiful women can't help but have this magical power over men, and so therefore, as men, we have to actually be careful and not allow them into our spaces.
yeah, and to some extent, I don't think they realize how potent that power is. There was a part in the documentary where Lauren is going to a speaking engagement in this beige dress, and I immediately had like a a physical reaction to it. And that was just like, what are you doing? Like, what you're doing. And luckily, I'm more of a Faith Goldie man myself. I don't know why,
How dare
but
you? How dare you?
I mean, I come from a long line of blonde women, so it's like the exoticism is different. Anyway, the you they can't separate it because they don't realize we can't separate it because we're men. Like we are
Yeah.
wired to get that like that big booty AOC. Look at that juicy Latino booty. I'm still thinking about it. It's a joke video, but all I'm still thinking about is the AOC booty.
I've never found
Degenerate.
AOC attractive, actually.
How dare you?
But yeah, and actually, interesting note, it's actually the same policy on Mount Athos, where these monks who have devoted their life to asceticism, even they have to be careful about they don't let women into Mount Athos.
What about you,
Um,
Nate? What about you, Nathan? Lauren or Faith? Which one?
that's the real
Um,
question here.
That's the real. That's
The real schism is about to begin.
the point of this stream.
okay, I guess I've never really thought that Lauren is that attractive.
You
Um,
fed.
Also, I have this like total aversion to, at a certain point, they both just started like injecting things into their faces, and half their faces were paralyzed and their lips looked all weird and all this kind of
Oh,
stuff. Like that kind of stuff just like
Yeah,
I completely weirds me out.
do you think
me too.
Lauren got some work done?
I could send you
Mm.
probably some I
Yes,
could send you
yeah.
some. There was a certain period of time where it was like part of her face was paralyzed, and I think that some of it has come back.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I find Faith probably more conventionally attractive. But I
But
kind of
she's
disagree.
definitely got lip injections for sure. But that's,
Yeah.
Right.
that's
Yeah.
part of it for me, the
But
degenerate aspect.
I kind of disagree with you to a degree that, like, as men, we can't separate it or whatever because,
Oh,
um,
you're married though, right? Not that
yes,
that has
but I
anything to do with
wasn't
it.
like back then. I wasn't when a lot of these things were first starting to become issues. And I could recognize simultaneously that if a man were saying the same things that they're saying, no one would care. And this is popular because this person's attractive. And maybe I think that they're attractive, but I also don't care that they're attractive. If that sort of makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Ultimately, the whole nobody cares because you're a woman, or nobody cares. Excuse me, you know what I'm saying? Is a way to just minimize that person and their significance, and it's an insult.
Right. And what the real value is, or what's interesting about it, is that maybe we can claim ourselves, we can pretend that we're completely unbiased or whatever, and we're only evaluating these things on the basis of the strength of the ideas. But even if we're doing that, the the impact that those different identities or personalities or whatever have on the culture, that becomes something that we can very easily comment on or observe, or um, like, if Lauren Southern puts out a video that was like, why I'm not a feminist. And even though we can be like, well, the ideas in that video, they're not particularly that strong, or there's certainly been stronger refutations of feminism. But we then notice that, oh, the fact that this is this young blonde girl, this then is relatable to all these other girls. And now suddenly all these other girls are questioning whether or not feminism is a viable, like, ideology, and they needed to hear it from a woman. And now suddenly there's this big social shift because none of them care what the professor has to say, so to speak. And maybe we can transition into the next question that you have coming up too, about like with Milo particularly, and him being this gay guy who was the champion of the right. And um, it's
Yeah, I mean, there is something cool about having attractive women on your side. Similar at the time, there was something cool about having a flamboyant gay on your side, I guess. Right?
I never
Because
Well,
saw
it's
it as cool, but I saw it as
what is
like a very short form, easy way to disarm certain types of accusations.
yeah, yeah,
yeah, and it was a bit interesting for me at the time because of the novelty. Because having come from like print fashion, film stuff, television, like the tons of gay guys there, and that was like a decade and a half of me just keeping my mouth shut. So finally, to have like someone from sort of that world in with the conservative talking points, the novelty is interesting. And it's like, oh, okay, it's cool. But then we get to the point now where Daily Wire is hiring Jordan Peterson, and his first video is talking to Dave Rubin about his science children and the modern eugenics of the new super gay right, and how that degrades the movement as a whole.
Yeah, then we have the right wing.
zero3.jpg renegade.
Yeah, then we have the right wing champion, like drag story hour or whatever.
Well, and they were doing that a bit with Turning Point. You remember when they were bringing in like the black gay guy, and then they would do the trans and like what's her name, Blair
Well,
White.
yeah, the online right still has Blair White. Right?
Right. And
Yeah,
so now we're quite critical of that stuff. But Milo was, in a sense, the first of that, where the right
yes,
started to really line up and defend this guy. I always looked at it like, I never saw Milo as any sort of moral champion, but observing the impact that he had on the culture was really interesting. And I could agree with him on certain things, but I never really saw him as like our guy.
sure. Yeah, I mean, yeah, he lost me. I liked some of the talking points, obviously, because they're ideological, but he lost me when he was carried in on that platform with a bunch of dudes carrying him in on a throne, like Artaxerxes.
Oh yeah, I remember that event.
What about when he French kissed Gavin McInnes?
I had already checked out at that time, and I understand why Gavin's doing it, but like, I, I just doesn't age. It didn't age
Well,
well.
well, that was once again mischief for the sake of mischief, I think. Right?
And Gavin was always a degenerate himself, right? Like
Yeah.
he had already at that point like stuck something up his butt on a live stream to like own Hillary Clinton or something. I don't know.
Sodomize yourself to own the libs.
That's basically, I think, what
Um,
happened.
okay. So anyway, I do have a final question to throw out. I guess I don't know how to transition from that, which is the online right going anywhere, or are we stuck?
Heck yeah, I think we're going somewhere because we're having these conversations of where are we going. It's not just the endless revolution like it is for the left, right? And they don't even realize it, but they're being influenced by demons. The first rebel is pushing them further and further down the black hole of death and destruction. But we're asking ourselves, like, okay, we've tried this for a while. We need to pivot, right? And that goes to some of the stuff that I've been talking about behind the scenes and will on videos is what are we going to do about this business stuff? What are we going to do about this art right movement, like the film stuff that we've been talking about, Jeff, for at this point a couple years? Like, are we going to make these films? Are we going to find a way to fund these and release these, distribute these to where they're viable products? Same thing with businesses. One of the things with the art right thing, we're going to talk about it, this IM 1776 issue 1 is talking about a lot of these issues, and you should check it out, guys.
Yeah.
But I think
Be here next Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern.
yeah, the idea of the coffee shop thing, you can sell coffee, you can do a bakery, but you can display art, right? You can sell other products in your little campy coffee shop. Try to get to the point where it's a sustainable business, and then we can grow from there. Because again, we talked about the funding with Antifa, like somebody's backing them. How are we going to back ourselves? Because we can't wait on Elon. We can't wait on Peter Thiel. We can't wait on the Mercer family. Like, it's not going to work that way for us. We have to seize the reins. Decentralize, fine. But we have to seize the reins and take this movement out of the basement.
Yeah, I guess that's a pretty good white pill perspective, actually, which is that there does seem to be this online right to real life friendship pipeline, as well as an online right to Christianity pipeline, which is very prominent, and then there's an online right to real life business connections pipeline that's going on. So, you know, optimistic signs there.
And I think that part of what you're describing sort of already exists within the church. Like, yeah, it already exists. It's already there. I'm at a place in my life where I don't particularly like, I don't want to work in some sort of, okay, if the left is really polarized and if the left is really territorial about the culture and they're making all these cultural demands on everyone else, um, that you basically have to be a leftist in order to work at a certain business or have certain types of jobs, and they're going to keep pushing that further and further into the economy. I don't want to just create like the right wing version of that. And um, I guess it's like I'm so checked out of the culture war now that I'm not I'm not trying to get distant right ideas into the minds of the public, mainly because I don't think people are really ready for them. And I've tried to have so many conversations with people that it just the the problem isn't them being exposed to the idea, whether or not they're exposed to the idea. It's more like the problem is that their life and their psyche isn't in the right place to even be able to consider the ideas at all. And so really what I would be looking for is just I just want to be able to work a job that's neutral, that doesn't have any ideological bend to it at all. And then any of the sort of like ideological war that is waged, well, that's done through the church. Um, I think that the
Yeah,
church has,
because it's also a spiritual war.
right. And I think that at least as it relates to Protestantism, um, I think the church has really dropped the ball. And seeing what happened over COVID, and I think the problem was that the church wasn't discerning enough about cultural issues. And the church probably needed to have been more culturally involved, and not in the ways that they were used to in the 80s and 90s. They didn't really keep up with what was happening on the internet. And all of a sudden, they're all giving their sermons on YouTube, where YouTube is setting the terms of service, and the government is telling them that they, can or can't meet. And um, so if there is a fight to be had, I think that it needs to be a sort of cultural or ideological fight that needs to be had. It needs to be on maintaining the integrity of your local church. And then from there, branch out.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you on that, Nathan. There are tools in Christianity specifically, besides the fact that I believe it to be the truth, but that will help you fight the real war that's going on all around you. Yeah, great. Jeff, do you want to answer your own question there as far as where you think we're going or where we should go? Give your prescription.
I'm tempted to throw out visit your local Orthodox church.
Well,
But
I mean, why not?
yeah,
You know,
I
it's
mean,
theology debate coming soon, but start, reach
yeah,
out and seek earnestly the face of God.
yeah. And this is I could just be saying that experientially as well, because that's where I've ended up going and finding what I was looking for.
Yeah, because
And
a lot of the Orthodox Church tends to be pretty based, and they're not, from the Protestant tradition side. Like I run across a lot of those "all are welcome" signs in blue areas. Obviously, out here not so much, but
I should also mention that there is something intimidating about going to an ethnic parish like the I did go to a Russian parish one time, uh, and from what I understand, Russians can be a little bit cold to strangers. But they're all so I currently go to an OCA parish, and it's a lot easier to kind of find your way in an English speaking parish. So that's my recommendation. And about the culture war thing, it's that one of the things that we're starting to wrap our heads around is this idea that you know all of our beliefs are informed by our other beliefs. It's a whole web of beliefs that we all have. So that's why when we just blast out culture war talking points, it doesn't really work because that one talking point doesn't fit into the other person's network. But if you can kind of address the various network of beliefs that people hold, then you can start to really talk to them.
well, yeah, that basically. Is there anything else? Because that sounds like a great wrap up, so we can go and play with our GI Joes now.
I guess I kind of have a final. I want to expand on my previous idea a little bit more too. Um, I think, obviously the ideological or spiritual fight is best done in the church in that sense. Um, I would say that that's the sort of like life giving component. And also, if you expect to actually take ground, that's what you need to do. Like, that's how you almost initiate your offensive. And you evangelize and you bring other people into what it is that your group is. There's that component, but there's also a sort of defensive component as well that isn't just defending your beliefs, but because if you're out if you're out working, you're out in the secular world, um, you're it's not always going to come down to theological debates because The secular world doesn't particularly care about that.
Well, I would say, as my final thought, that people's is people's. And you can always trust people to be people. And a lot of this weird, unethical, drug-fueled greed, rage, unethical throwing under the bus, like that happens everywhere. That is not unique to the dissident right or the online right or your Discord community. That is the state of man fallen. And so you're going to get this everywhere you go. So don't be discouraged by Lauren's throwing people under the bus in this documentary, because that's going to be how things are everywhere. And you know, I'm guilty of being a nut myself. So seek earnestly the face of God and do your best to grow authentically as a person. So you have these morals, so you're not throwing people under the bus, right? We just have to grow and get healthy spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, relationally. Pursue it, right? That's how we get out of this thing. Where are we going from here? Everywhere. But we have to go rightly. And if we don't go rightly, we're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, and I think being able to say no is a big part of it. Like I say, knowing where the line is drawn and being willing to get fired or whatever the thing is, because they're placing more and more irrational expectations on us. And to a certain degree, I think we win this by just not going along with it, just being normal and being close enough to the source of life that we have sort of this strength to put up with their insanity. And it's not even like we need to pull them apart. We just need to almost like stand there and say no.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, Jeff, do you have a really poignant closing thought?
No, I was just gonna say that's how you close the show.
There you go. Well, thank you for joining us, everyone. Check us out, ironagearchive.com. Check out the YouTube channel.
I'm gonna post a Discord link in the comments.
Discord link in the comments. What was your Twitter again, Nate? Comfartgroiper 1488 at.
No, I'll throw my YouTube channel in the chat. I've got all sorts of different aliases and stuff, and yeah.
Yeah, and Nathan did a great video on this Lauren Southern thing. That was my first introduction to it. I watched that first, and then I watched the documentary. So maybe we should put the documentary in the show notes too. But it's great. Engage. We're all in this together.
Cool. Thanks for the conversation, guys.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
In a world consumed by an iron age, the fires grow cold, the blood runs thin, the foundations crack under the weight of decay. Chaos reigns as man finds himself without his brother. Yet out of the fire rises a pitiful dross, the refuse deemed unfit to fortify the Iron Age archive. Join us on Discord. As iron sharpens iron, so too does one man sharpen another.
IronAgeArchive.com. Admittance not a guarantee. Void where prohibited. Anime PFPs may or may not disqualify.